From Focal Point Radio and Radio Fairfax in Fairfax, Virginia, this is the Mimi Geerges Show. So I get a pitch for a book with the title Terrorists in Love, The Real Lives of Islamic Radicals. I've done lots of shows about terrorism, but this title gets my attention. I'm intrigued and pretty skeptical. It's about an American Jew, a former federal prosecutor and congressional investigator. He travels around the Muslim world and, for the book, profiles 6 jihadists, some bloodthirsty killers, others more like wannabes. I thought it would be one of those, oh, they're oppressed by their government, or it's because of American foreign policy, or they hate our freedom. You know what I'm talking about. But I have to say I was drawn in by these stories, some hopeful, some depressing, but always eye-opening. It's a rare window into the jihadist psyche. Ken Ballen is the author of Terrorists in Love, and he joins me in the studio. Ken, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mimi, for having me here.
Ken, getting these guys to open up to you so fully and honestly, you say that the key is empathy. But how were you able to show empathy to people that had killed innocent people?
Well, I had spent a long time in my career as a prosecutor and investigator. I investigated and prosecuted organized crime figures, child molesters, drug dealers. So if you can interrogate and interview and show empathy in those situations, I could do so in these situations.
In 2004, you founded a nonprofit research institute called Terror Free Tomorrow. What's the mission?
The mission is to find out why people support extremism. And I took as my model being a prosecutor, which is really trying to find out the facts first. For example, when I prosecuted the mafia, I spent almost a year on a wiretap listening to their conversations. And then when we made the initial arrest of 50 people, I interrogated them at length, not for days, weeks and months. That's how I was able to take them down. And we weren't doing that in the world of radicalism. We were responding, we were reacting, but we really weren't investigating what's going on.
But who would your customer be?
I hope it's the American people, because I think if the American people are properly informed, they'll put pressure on their government to have the right policies as opposed to the wrong ones, but also the government as well.
And who funds this organization?
Various individuals and family foundations.
So how do you think that the typical American gets it wrong in thinking about or understanding Islamic radicals?
The typical American doesn't know. Not only the typical American doesn't know, the American policymakers don't know. The problem is no one has talked to these people. I interviewed over 100 radicals and extremists who talked to me. There was maybe another 100 who didn't talk to me very much, who was just giving me rhetoric. But about 100 over 5 years actually talked to me and sat down. I was the first American they had ever met. I was the first Jew they had ever met. They'd never met one before. So actually seeing no one has asked them, why are you fighting? What are you doing? What motivates you? No one asked them. If you don't ask, you don't find the answers.
The first is a kid from Saudi Arabia. What motivated him to go to Iraq and to try to kill Americans?
It's not a simple answer, and that's one lesson from this book. And if your listeners read the book and see the context and the complexity of it, there's no simple answer. Everyone, radical or terrorist or not, operates from mixed motives. This young man had a difficult relationship with his father. He wanted his father's approval. He was very close to his mother, very close to his grandfather.
He was a mama's boy.
He was a mama's boy.
And his dad continually taunted him and said, you're a mama's boy, it's time for you to grow up.
It's time for you to grow up. So first he joins a gang. Kind of a typical thing for a young man. Drops out of school, joins a gang. And they run around with fast cars, chasing girls. In that society, that means never looking at them from afar. But they engage in kind of typical boyish mischief. This doesn't provide him with any solace. He can't find work. He still wants his father's approval, and he meets one of his former gang members, his cousin, who has now joined the radical cause. And he thinks this is his way to be a good Muslim, to do the right thing, to redeem himself from sins. But I also think there was a big psychological element. He wanted his father's approval. And
to be a man.
Be a man, right, exactly, be a man. I hate to say this, and I don't mean to offend someone, but it may be a reason that many people join the Marines or the Army in this country. It's a chance to strike out on your own, gain your family's approval, and be a man.
But all these people that you profile really bought into this idea that if they kill, quote, the infidel, or they die killing infidels, they will be assured of going to heaven and enjoy all the heavenly carnal delights.
That's absolutely right. And heaven has everything that earth does not have. It has the ability to love whomever you want and the ability to drink wine and enjoy the tremendous good life that you're denied on earth.
Women, and more women.
Yes, that's right. There's an interesting story in the book of jihadi Romeo and Juliet from Saudi Arabia, and they were sweethearts, as sweethearts may be anywhere. But he didn't have the $30,000 dowry or payment to marry her, so her father married her off to a man 3 times her age as a 4th wife who had the $35,000. So this young man, Abi, goes to fight in holy war, in jihad, so that he can die and go to heaven, and in heaven he can marry whomever he wants, which is his sweetheart Miriam.
So what happens to him when he goes off to fight jihad?
Well, it's an interesting story. He goes off to fight, and he finds that it's not a jihad. Al-Qaeda is killing people brutally. They're stealing. They're lying. And it's a manipulation. And he becomes very disillusioned by it and meets another young Iraqi who tells him what's really going on in Iraq, and he seeks to escape from it. And he does escape and has a rather torturous road back home.
But when you say that he finds it's not really jihad, what was his concept of what a real jihad was?
His concept of a real jihad was to die fighting for God, serving God in a holy war. A holy war can't be, by definition, a war of personal gain and murder for the sake of murder. That's not a holy war.
And do we know what happened to his erstwhile sweetheart?
We don't know what happened to her. She was taken by this man, and in her letter to her sweetheart says she was raped because she felt she was raped. She never consented to marry him, so she had never consented in her mind and with her heart or her soul to marry this man. She escapes from him and tries to join jihad too, because she has the same notion in her mind that if I die and go to heaven, I can marry my sweetheart Abi. We don't know what happened to her.
Ken Ballen is in the studio with me. He's the founder and director of a nonprofit research institute called Terror-Free Tomorrow. He's the author of the book Terrorists in Love, The Real Lives of Islamic Radicals. Going back to the first person that you profiled, his name was Ahmed. What was his wake-up call, so to speak?
Well, he goes to Iraq to fight. Not necessarily to die right away, as he told me, but to fight for jihad. He's kept in isolation. He's not trained. He has very little social interaction. 4 months after being there, he's finally given a mission. He's told to drive with 2 other Iraqi jihadis in a truck.
A fuel tanker?
Yes, fuel tanker. He doesn't know what's inside, though. And they drive in Baghdad, and about 1,000 yards before reaching the target, the 2 Iraqis jump out of the truck. And all he can do is hold on to the steering wheel and study it straight ahead. And they say, we'll pick you up right over there. Less than 20 seconds later, the truck explodes with him inside. It's got 26 tons of liquid explosives. 8 people die. Countless people are injured. He miraculously survives this horrendous attack. He is taken at first to an Iraqi hospital. He's mistaken for a victim. He's covered with burns. His both hands are burned away. His face is entirely burned. His legs are burned. He's crippled and in great pain. He's tortured by, when he tells the Iraqi doctor who he really is and why he was really there. He's tortured by the Iraqis, officials and soldiers. He's then taken to Abu Ghraib, of all places. And he had seen the pictures that we all know of the infamous American prison and the torture that occurred then. And this was his spark to go to Iraq to begin with. So he's scared to death as he's going there that he's going to be tortured too. Instead, what happens to him, he gets 30 operations from the American doctors, army doctors, to cellulite transplants, skin grafts. He's given rehabilitation therapy, and most of all, he meets an army medic. It's the first woman he's ever met outside his own family. And he is just so taken with her kindness and her care and her patient rehabilitation. Every day she takes care of him. He's transformed. And he goes from, as he told me, the Americans, I came to fight for Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda treated me like a rotten piece of meat. The Americans I came to fight against treated me with kindness and respect.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it changed him. It totally changed him.
Malik is an Afghan. He grew up in a refugee camp in Pakistan, went to a madrasa, became a Taliban. What's his story?
Exactly right. He didn't know anything else but the religious teachings, and he had a dream. And because he had a dream or a vision, when he was recruited, he was brought to meet Mullah Omar, who's the leader of the Taliban, and recounted his dream to Mullah Omar. Well, this elevated him among the Taliban because Mullah Omar himself came to power as the leader of the Taliban because of a dream. And this was widely circulated among the Taliban soldiers.
I noticed that dreams played a really big role in these stories.
Very, very big role.
We would call that superstition.
I don't want to pass judgment on it. I don't call it. Dreams play a really big role. Jinn, which are mystical beings that are neither human or ghostly, play a very big role as well. People have visions of these spirits, and the dreams are essential. And Mullah Omar, who's the leader of the Taliban, we've been fighting in that war for 10 years now, he determines battle strategy by a dream. And here's very interesting, Mimi. After 9/11, we invade Afghanistan, the Taliban retreat. Mullah Omar retreats. And he goes and sets up shop inside Pakistan. And if you recall, for that first year after we're in the war, there's no action. The Taliban are not fighting us. Mullah Omar is sitting around in Quetta in Pakistan waiting for a dream to tell him whether or not to lead the holy war. That's what he's doing. And then this fellow Malik comes to him and tells him this dream he had of his beard, Mullah Omar's beard, turning white. And this is a great moment. God is praised in this moment because his beard being all white in the dream signifies that his beard took on the robe of the Prophet Muhammad. And because the beard became the robe of the Prophet Muhammad, that meant that they should fight in holy war against the United States. And now our policy in Afghanistan, this is what's really happening. This is the real lives of Islamic radicals, especially the Taliban. And this is how they think. And we're sitting around fighting, losing. We've lost 2,000 of our people in Afghanistan. And our stated U.S. policy is to bring the Taliban to the negotiating table. Well, we can be waiting a long time if Mullah Omar is on the other side waiting for a dream to tell them whether or not to negotiate. Meanwhile, we're losing our men and women every day.
Our blood and treasure.
Exactly.
So Malik was a Taliban fighter. He was even one of those guys that went around, what is it called, promotion of virtue. And
that's right. He was part of the religious police, the promotion of virtue and the prevention of vice.
Right.
And he deeply believed he was doing the right thing.
I mean, these are brutal guys. I mean, they're the ones that go around cutting off hands, stoning women to death.
Absolutely. But he believed this was right. As he said, I was bringing Islam to the people. I was bringing justice to the people. Not just the city folk wouldn't have the high privilege. Everyone would live under the same law, and that's the law of God. He believed he was doing the right thing.
In the end, he became disillusioned with the Taliban, not because of the violence, but because he felt like they had become corrupted by the Pakistani
That's right.
government.
He became disillusioned with the Taliban because of the corruption that he witnessed, the theft, the stealing, which is kind of a common theme throughout. When people become disillusioned, they become disillusioned because these leaders fail to live up to the religious ideals that they propagate, which is an important aspect of the book that we overlook entirely here in the United States. It's an untold story, really. But anyway, in the case of Malik, he became disillusioned. And if you read the book, you'll see how many people, when they become disillusioned, go away from jihad and go away from holy war. And I thought that was the case with Malik when I was sitting him and I was hearing how he's disillusioned.
And you were hopeful. You were
I
like,
was very hopeful.
This is it. This is the breakthrough.
This is a breakthrough. And I had some others with other people. And he reaches out to hold my hand in friendship, which among the Pashtun, which is the ethnic group that make up the Taliban largely, he's holding my hand in friendship and telling me, I'm your friend. And as he's telling me this, this is towards the end of the interview, he's saying to me, and he knows that I'm a Jew. I mean, this is not something he doesn't know. He's saying to me that Prophet Muhammad said that the day of judgment will not come until every Jew, every infidel, is killed. And if the Jew is hiding behind a rock, the rock will cry out, "O Muslim, kill the Jew that is hiding behind me." If a Jew is hiding behind a tree itself will cry out, "O Muslim, kill the Jew." Meanwhile, he's holding my hand in friendship.
Right, and he even quotes the Quran, Ken.
He does quote the Quran.
That says something along the lines of, the greatest enemy of the believers is the Jews.
That's right.
He goes on and on about the Jews
he
and
does.
how...
He does. He had never met a Jew before, though. I mean, I was the first one he had actually met in the flesh. But he's believes, I mean, at that point I wanted to get out of the interview. I mean, I had enough of that one. But, I have to contrast that story with another person in the book, which is Shahid, who's also part of a radical cell. He's a Taliban guy. He's part of a cell that was later responsible for bombing the Marriott Hotel. So he's pretty hardcore, too. And he's sitting with me, and we had a long interview, and he knew I was American. He knew I was Jew. In fact, some of his colleagues were trying to encourage him to meet me to do another Daniel Pearl, as they put it, to lure me away from the hotel. And if you recall, Daniel Pearl was a Wall Street Journal reporter, an American Jew who was killed by the al-Qaeda and Taliban in Pakistan. So there was some talk. I don't think this Shahid ever intended that. In any event, I'm sitting with him. We finished with the we talked all day long. I'm sitting with him at a restaurant in a hotel. And we're sitting there, and the food that I'm eating, you have to set the scene. I'm immersed in this world. I'm full of these dreams. I'm full of these visions that these people are telling me about. And here this guy is. He looks like Osama bin Laden. He's got this long black beard and white robes and the sandals, the whole jihadi uniform, as I like to call it. And I remember as we were eating the hummus and other stuff, this dream I had in the morning, and I start to recount it to him, and he becomes very, very quiet. And he starts asking me very specific questions. Did you see the man's face in the dream? What did he look like? And all this. So I told him whatever I remembered. And all of a sudden he shouted very loudly, "Allahu Akbar, praise God." Everybody in the restaurant turns around to look at him because this is quite a scene here. And then he whispers to me, "You had the dream that I've been waiting my whole life to have. You saw a vision of the Prophet Muhammad. And if the Prophet Muhammad appears in a dream, it cannot take the form of Satan or the devil. It has to be real. And because you're a non-believer, a Jew, and you didn't see his face, that means it was a true dream. If I had told him I'd seen his face, God knows what would have happened at that moment. But in his mind, it was a true dream." He started quoting to me different passages from the Quran, not the hateful, killing ones, but the loving, tolerant ones. He knew the Quran by heart because he was deeply immersed in this world. And he was changed. He was transformed right before my eyes because of the humanity of a Jew, an American, before him having this dream. It was an amazing experience for him. He moved away from the radicals, and it was, frankly, for me.
The book we're discussing is called Terrorists in Love, The Real Lives of Islamic Radicals. Ken Ballen is in the studio with me. A Pakistani man named Zedi was so fascinating because of what he revealed about the Pakistani government and the double game that he says that they're playing. But first, tell us a bit about his background.
Zedi called himself a career terrorist for Islam. And unlike some of the young men we've been talking about who are very idealistic and very motivated to do good and be good Muslims, Zedi's motives were much more complex. He seemed to enjoy the violence. He seemed to enjoy the power and the glory that came from it. But when I met him, he had done this for more than 2 decades, and he was riddled with guilt. And his story came out like a confessional because he felt so much guilt from what he had done because by his count, he said he had killed thousands of people. He had trained 5,000 terrorists a year in training camp. He had smuggled arms to the Taliban to fight. So he had done a lot of very bad things.
He came from a really wealthy family, well-educated. He was educated in British schools.
That's correct.
Why did he become radicalized?
I think he became radicalized, as he put it, because it was kind of an act of adolescent rebellion. His father was his father was a doctor, and he came from a very wealthy, feudal, landowning family, prominent inside Pakistan, and this was an act of rebellion for him to go to religion and to be strike out as a very fundamentalist Muslim.
But he really believed it.
He really believed it, absolutely. But he also enjoyed the power and the glory that came from it. He was less of a kind of pious and more, this is the right. As he says, he read the radical teachings, and he read the parts of Quran that emphasize that kind of militant aspect, and he never looked back.
He says that America is funding both sides of the war on terror. What did he mean by that?
Well, he said that America is literally funding both sides. This is not figurative. What he told me, and what I corroborated, was that he trained terrorists, 5,000 a year, to fight against the United States in Afghanistan. He did this at a camp very near Abbottabad where bin Laden was, and we can discuss what he said about bin Laden. But he trained those terrorists, 5,000 a year. He smuggled arms to the Taliban. Meanwhile, he was on the payroll of the Pakistani Army and its secret intelligence agency, the ISI. So while we gave $20 billion to Pakistan since 9/11, they were funding training of soldiers, terrorists, to fight against us in Afghanistan and to smuggle arms. So as Zeddy said to me, the United States is literally funding our troops in Afghanistan, and we're funding the enemy troops.
It would seem that the obvious solution would be to stop sending aid to Pakistan.
That's what Zeddy said we ought to try.
Pakistan has nuclear weapons. What did he say about that?
He said that many who are in the Army and the ISI who have control over the nuclear weapons are sympathetic to the radical cause. And he gave me specific examples of people who were that way.
He named names.
He did. He met, after 9/11, in Abbottabad with a top al-Qaeda lieutenant and an army officer, Pakistani army officer, who discussed with him trying to smuggle nuclear weapons to the al-Qaeda. He said he engaged in those conversations.
And what did he say about bin Laden?
He said that bin Laden, he didn't know exactly where bin Laden was hiding or being protected. He said bin Laden was being protected by the ISI inside Pakistan. He didn't know the exact city, but he got the region correct, where he was, in northwest Pakistan. And you have to kind of picture the scene. Here, after 9/11, he meets in Abbottabad, which was where bin Laden was found, with al-Qaeda and ISI guys. Down the road, just up in the mountains, it's not very far away, is the big terrorist training camp. It's the same area. So the fact that bin Laden was in the area he said he was, near the training camp of the biggest training camp for terrorists in Pakistan, corroborates Zeddy's story about the ISI harboring bin Laden. The facts on the ground corroborate it.
This is pretty scary, Ken, to be honest with you. I mean, we're looking at Armageddon here. I mean, if they get a nuclear weapon.
It is very scary, and as Zeddy said to me, we're worried about bin Laden, but we should be worried about these people, these generals who and politicians in Pakistan who talk the democratic talk, speak perfect Queen's English, and talk about democracy. Meanwhile, they have nuclear weapons, are sympathetic to the radical cause, and they're actively aiding and abetting the Taliban fighting to us. They're providing sanctuary to bin Laden. They're providing sanctuary to Mullah Omar. They're providing arms to the Taliban and training to Taliban fighters.
I mean, when you think about it, I am much more concerned about Pakistan than I am about Saudi Arabia or the other Arab countries.
Well, I do believe, and I think this book illustrates, that the center of gravity of the radical movement has really shifted from the Middle East to South Asia. And it's now in Pakistan, Afghanistan.
What made Zeddy turn away from the Taliban?
The corruption was unbelievable. He was part of a radical Islamic party, the leading radical Islamic party inside Pakistan. And he witnessed the people skimming money and putting it in Swiss bank accounts, killing of opponents, manipulation, all for personal gain. And it began to wear on him after a while, and he left the party, and then the ISI picked him up as someone. And the whole duplicity and the corruption of the entire enterprise drove him away from it, and his own personal sense of guilt, too.
What's he doing now?
Well, I don't know exactly what he's doing now at the very moment, but when I did meet him, he had trained as a doctor, so he was going back into the jails, administering medical care to some of the prisoners, and he, as he said, trying to dissuade them from going off on jihad. But he said, in our part of the world, There's not a lot of opportunity. There's much drudgery. There's much poverty and ignorance. And this is an easy path to glory for many young men, and they take it because of that reason. It's hard to dissuade them.
Ken Ballen is in the studio with me, founder and director of a nonprofit research institute called Terror-Free Tomorrow. The book is Terrorists in Love. Do you think the Pakistani government will go after him for what he told you?
Well, he said to me that, Ken, if I were you, I wouldn't be taking vacation anytime soon in our stately mountains in Pakistan, because in our country, accidents happen even if coincidences seldom do. So it was a real warning to me. I don't know what's going to happen to him. I just don't know. But one of the sources for this book, one of the journalists who helped me write it, was killed in May in Pakistan.
Ken, what do you think the implications are of what you learned for U.S. foreign policy?
I think it's important that people read these actual stories. It's not a policy book. We don't understand where many of these people are coming. Now, some, Mimi, you can tell from our talk, are implacable enemies no matter what and represent a real threat to us. But others are not. And because we refuse to talk to them, because we refuse to engage them, I think we ultimately create more enemies than we necessarily have to have. And part of that is exposing the corruption of these people. I sometimes think we killed Anwar al-Awlaki in Yemen. He was an American-born cleric, a radical preacher. And had we gotten out, not directly but indirectly, the fact that this man had been arrested and indeed convicted 3 times for soliciting prostitutes in the United States, that would have done more to damage the cause than killing him and making him a martyr.
Yeah, but they would have just said that this is CIA propaganda.
Well, you can't get it out directly. That's why I said indirectly. There are plenty of people within the Muslim world who are imams and clerics who you can circulate information and facts to. And facts do matter to people still, and that's what I discovered. And also this book provides a wonderful example. These stories of these people and others like them need to be told within the Muslim and Arab world because it weakens the movement from within. And ultimately, that's how it's going to die, from within.
Ken Ballen, founder and director of Terror-Free Tomorrow. The book is Terrorists in Love, The Real Lives of Islamic Radicals. It's published by Free Press. Ken, thanks so much for being on the program.
My pleasure.
Email me your comments or questions to feedback@mgshow.org and join us on Facebook and Twitter. You can support this program through a variety of ways. Just visit mgshow.org and click on the link that says Support.